They say good fences make good neighbors. But what happens when your neighbor doesn't just want a fence, but wants total, absolute control over everything you own? I found out the hard way. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when the unthinkable happened on my own property. I stood on my porch, gripping my coffee mug so hard my knuckles turned white. Right before my eyes, a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck was dragging my $120,000 Kubota tractor down the county road, and standing at the edge of my driveway, watching it happen with a smug, victorious grin, was a woman named Brenda. Brenda didn't own the tractor. She didn't own my land. What she did own was the title of president of the Whispering Oaks Homeowners Association, a brand new, ultra-luxury subdivision that had just been built right on the border of my family's 50-acre farm. To understand how my vital farm equipment was essentially hijacked in broad daylight, you have to understand the nightmare that was Whispering Oaks. For 3 generations, my family's land was surrounded by nothing but quiet woods and open fields. But 2 years ago, developers bought out the neighboring farm and bulldozed it. Within months, 50 massive, cookie-cutter mansions popped up like expensive mushrooms. With those mansions came a brand new demographic of people who believed the world revolved entirely around their property values. And at the center of it all was Brenda. Brenda was terrifying. She wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She was a predator in a tennis skirt. When it came to enforcing her petty neighborhood regulations, she operated with the raw power and brute strength of a grizzly bear, completely flattening anyone who dared to stand in her path. She fined people for having the wrong shade of white on their mailboxes. She towed contractors' vans if they parked an inch onto the sidewalk. But her authority was strictly limited to the borders of Whispering Oaks, or, at least, it was legally supposed to be. Brenda couldn't stand the fact that right next to her pristine, manicured kingdom was a working farm. She hated the dust. She hated the noise. But most of all, she absolutely despised my tractor. I used that Kubota every single day to grade the driveway, move feed, and clear brush. When I wasn't using it, I parked it near my barn, which happened to be about 40 feet from the invisible property line separating my land from the HOA. It started with the letters. I would go out to the mailbox and find thick, gold-embossed envelopes from the Whispering Oaks HOA. The first one was a courtesy notice. Brenda claimed my tractor was a visual blight that was actively degrading the aesthetic integrity of their neighborhood. She demanded I build a storage shed to hide it from view. I wasn't in their HOA. I had never signed a single document agreeing to their rules. I crumpled the letter up and tossed it into the wood stove. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one wasn't a warning. It was a formal fine for $500. I actually laughed out loud. I thought it was a joke. I imagined Brenda sitting in her dining room, furiously typing up fake invoices for a man she had absolutely zero legal jurisdiction over. I ignored that letter, too, but I drastically underestimated how far an entitled person will go when they feel ignored. The morning of the tow, I had parked the tractor slightly closer to the property line than usual because I was fixing a section of my perimeter fence. I left the keys in my pocket and went inside to grab a quick cup of coffee. I was inside for maybe 15 minutes. That's when I heard the unmistakable, roaring hiss of a commercial tow truck's air brakes. I rushed to the window, expecting to see someone broken down on the public road. Instead, I saw a massive flatbed backing directly onto my dirt driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I threw open my front door and sprinted down the porch steps. There was Brenda, standing on my property, pointing aggressively at my Kubota. The tow operator had already hooked up the heavy steel chains to the front axle and was winching my livelihood up onto his truck. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice echoing across the open field. "Drop that right now! What do you think you're doing?" Brenda slowly turned to face me. She didn't look scared. She didn't look apologetic. She looked triumphant. "You were warned," she sneered, crossing her arms. "You failed to pay your fines, and you failed to remove the eyesore. The HOA has authorized the removal of this abandoned equipment." She thought she had won. She thought she was untouchable. But Brenda was about to realize she had just committed grand theft auto. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the man sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching this entire scene unfold through the window, was the county sheriff. You see, Sheriff Jim wasn't just the chief law enforcement officer for the entire county. He was also my closest neighbor, my oldest friend, and my regular Tuesday morning coffee buddy. And Jim absolutely hates bullies. The heavy wooden screen door of my farmhouse slammed shut with a crack like a rifle shot. Brenda jumped slightly, her smug smile faltering for just a fraction of a second as Jim walked out onto the porch. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He had on faded denim jeans, a plaid work shirt, and a pair of worn-out boots. To Brenda, he probably just looked like another uncultured farmhand. She had no idea she was staring down the barrel of a massive legal catastrophe. "Is there a problem out here?" Jim asked, his voice low and dangerously calm as he slowly walked down the porch steps. Brenda puffed out her chest, instantly reverting to her authoritative HOA dictator persona. "There is no problem," she snapped, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "This equipment is in violation of Whispering Oak's covenants. We are removing it. I suggest you both step back and let the professionals work." Jim stopped halfway down the driveway. He looked at the massive tow truck. He looked at my $120,000 Kubota tractor, currently suspended by heavy steel chains over the flatbed. Then, he looked directly at the tow truck driver. "Son," Jim called out, ignoring Brenda completely, "did you verify the title of that equipment before you hooked up your chains?" The tow operator, a burly guy in a grease-stained hoodie, hesitated. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked nervously between Brenda and Jim. The lady here signed the impound authorization. She said it was abandoned on HOA property." Jim took another step forward. The gravel crunched loudly under his boots. "She lied to you," I interjected, stepping up right next to Jim. "That tractor is sitting on my private arm, and she doesn't own it." The tow driver's face immediately dropped. In the towing business, hooking up a vehicle on private property without the owner's consent or a valid police order isn't just a mistake. It's a career-ending lawsuit waiting to happen. But Brenda wasn't about to let her victory slip away. "Don't listen to them," she shrieked at the driver, her voice climbing an octave. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I signed the work order. If you don't tow that piece of junk right now, I will ensure your company is blacklisted from every subdivision in this county." The driver reached for the winch controls. He was torn. Brenda was a wealthy, intimidating woman in a designer jacket, and he was just trying to do his job. He pulled the lever. The hydraulic winch whined, dragging my tractor another 6 inches up the steel ramp. That was the absolute worst mistake he could have made. Jim didn't yell. He didn't run. He simply reached into his back pocket and pulled out a heavy, leather bifold wallet. He flipped it open, letting it hang casually from his fingertips. The morning sun caught the brilliant, polished silver of a 7-point county sheriff's star. "Turn off the winch," Jim ordered. This time, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command that carried the full weight of the law. The tow driver froze. His eyes locked onto the silver badge. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost. He violently slapped the emergency stop button on the side of his rig. The hydraulic whine died instantly. "Sir, I didn't know," the driver stammered, raising his hands in the air and backing away from his own truck. "She told me it was HOA property. I have the paperwork." "The paperwork is fraudulent," Jim replied coldly, stepping up to the flatbed. Brenda scoffed, marching right up to Jim. She completely ignored the badge. Her ego was so massive, so absolutely blinding, that she genuinely believed her position as an HOA president outranked the local police force. "This is a civil matter," Brenda yelled, pointing her finger inches from Jim's face. "You have no jurisdiction over HOA bylaws. I am having this eyesore removed, and you cannot stop me." Jim looked at Brenda's finger. Then, he looked her dead in the eye. "Ma'am, you are right about one thing. I don't care about your bylaws," Jim said softly. "But I do care about the penal code." Jim reached to his belt and pulled out his radio. "Because right now, I am looking at a suspect attempting to steal a piece of heavy agricultural machinery valued at over $100,000. Jim keyed the microphone. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Miller. I need 2 marked units at my location immediately." Brenda's jaw dropped. The reality of the situation finally started to crack through her delusions of grandeur. "Steal?" she gasped. "I'm not stealing it. I'm impounding it. When you take property that doesn't belong to you, from land that doesn't belong to you, using fraudulent documents." Jim smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "That's grand theft auto, Brenda. And in this state, that's a Class C felony." The sound of distant sirens began to echo through the trees. Brenda was trapped, but instead of backing down, she did something completely unhinged. The distant wail of sirens should have been a wake-up call. For a normal person, the realization that the police were mere minutes away would induce panic, apologies, or at least a tactical retreat. But Brenda wasn't normal. She was an HOA president who had spent the last 2 years functioning as an unquestioned dictator. Her brain simply could not compute the idea of losing. Instead of backing down, she doubled down in the most spectacular, unhinged way imaginable. "You are bluffing!" she shrieked, her face turning a deep, dangerous shade of plum. "You're not a sheriff. You're just a dirty farmer covering for another dirty farmer." Jim didn't even blink. He just stood there, his arms crossed over his plaid shirt, radiating the calm authority of a man who had dealt with violent criminals, cartel runners, and worse. Brenda was nothing to him but a loud nuisance. But Brenda wasn't done. Realizing that Jim wasn't going to budge, she turned her wrath completely onto the terrified tow truck driver. "Hook it back up," she screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured nail at his chest. "I am paying you a premium rate. If you do not pull that tractor out of here right this second, I will sue you for breach of contract, and I will personally bankrupt your miserable little company." The driver looked at Brenda. He looked at Jim's silver star. The choice took him less than half a second. "Lady, you are out of your mind," the driver snapped. He scrambled up onto the tilted flatbed of his rig and frantically began unhooking the heavy steel chains from my Kubota's front axle. "I'm not going to federal prison for a landscaping dispute." He threw the heavy chains onto the steel deck with a deafening clang. "What are you doing?" Brenda wailed, actually stomping her foot on the dirt like a spoiled toddler. "I order you to take that machine." "I'm leaving," the driver shouted back. He jumped down from the bed, practically sprinting to the cab of his truck. He fired up the massive diesel engine, disengaged the PTO, and slammed the truck into drive. But Brenda wasn't going to let her prize escape. in a move that defied all logic, self-preservation, and common sense. Brenda threw herself in front of the moving tow truck. She stood dead center in my gravel driveway, her arms spread wide in a T-pose, blocking the massive commercial vehicle from leaving my property. "You are not leaving without that tractor," she bellowed over the roar of the diesel engine. The tow driver slammed on his brakes. The massive rig lurched to a violent halt, the air brakes hissing in protest. The heavy flatbed shuddered, and my unchained tractor violently rocked back and forth, mere inches from rolling right off the back. I felt a surge of pure adrenaline. If that tractor rolled off, it was going to crush everything in its path. "Get out of the way, Brenda," I yelled, taking a step forward. Before she could respond, the screech of tires tore through the morning air. 2 marked county sheriff's cruisers came flying down the public road, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as they drifted onto my property. Their red and blue lights painted the side of my barn in flashing, chaotic colors. 4 deputies piled out of the cruisers instantly. Their hands were resting on their duty belts, their eyes scanning the chaotic scene. A giant tow truck, a teetering piece of heavy machinery, and a woman in a designer blazer physically blockading the road. This was Brenda's moment. She thought her cavalry had arrived. She genuinely believed that because she paid higher property taxes than me, the police were essentially her private security force. She immediately dropped her T-pose and sprinted toward the approaching deputies, waving her arms frantically. "Officers, thank God," she cried out, her voice dripping with fake, manufactured victimhood. "Arrest these men. Arrest them right now." The lead deputy, a tall, imposing man named Miller, paused. He looked at Brenda, bewildered. "Ma'am, calm down. Who are we arresting?" Brenda spun around and pointed a trembling, dramatic finger directly at me and Jim. "These 2 aggressive, violent men are interfering with official HOA business. They are illegally blocking a commercial tow, and one of them is even impersonating a police officer. I want them in handcuffs immediately." Deputy Miller followed her pointing finger. He looked at me. Then, he looked at the man standing next to me in the faded jeans and plaid shirt. The color drained from Deputy Miller's face faster than water down a drain. Because Deputy Miller wasn't looking at an impersonator, he was looking at his ultimate boss, the man who had hired him, the man who signed his paychecks, and the most feared, respected lawman in a 200-mile radius. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the ranch. The only sound was the low, rumbling idle of the tow truck. Deputy Miller swallowed hard, completely ignoring Brenda. He snapped to attention, his posture rigidly straight. "Sheriff," Miller said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet morning. "What are your orders, sir?" Brenda froze. Her arm was still pointing at Jim, but her mouth was suddenly hanging open. The gears in her brain were violently grinding to a halt as the horrific reality of the situation finally crashed down upon her. Jim slowly walked past Brenda, not even giving her a glance, and stopped in front of Deputy Miller. And the words that came out of Jim's mouth next were going to destroy Brenda's entire life. The silence that follows a shattered ego is the loudest sound in the world. Brenda stood completely paralyzed in the gravel. Her mind was frantically short-circuiting, desperately trying to process how the unkempt, flannel-wearing farmer was suddenly the supreme commander of the heavily armed officers she had just called for backup. Jim didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He was entirely in his element, operating with a cold, terrifying, and absolute efficiency. "Deputy Miller," Jim said, his voice carrying clearly over the low rumble of the tow truck's idling engine. "I have a suspect here who has knowingly trespassed onto private agricultural property." Miller nodded. taking a slow, calculated step forward. "Yes, Sheriff. She has falsified legal documents," Jim continued, his eyes locked onto Brenda, "claiming legal jurisdiction over land she does not own. And she has attempted to forcibly seize a piece of agricultural machinery valued at over $120,000. That was the breaking point. The reality of those charges finally snapped Brenda out of her frozen stupor. "No!" Brenda shrieked, backing away as Deputy Miller unclipped the handcuffs from his duty belt. "You cannot do this. I am the president of Whispering Oaks. This is an HOA matter. It's a civil dispute over property aesthetics." She was still clinging to her imaginary throne. She genuinely believed her leather-bound HOA rulebook was a magical shield against the state penal code. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back," Deputy Miller ordered. His tone left absolutely zero room for negotiation. Brenda didn't comply. Instead, she turned to me. Her eyes were wild, darting frantically back and forth, like a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped shut. "Tell them," she demanded, her voice cracking into a desperate squeak. "Tell them I was just enforcing the neighborhood standards. Tell them to stop this ridiculous charade right now." I leaned casually against the wooden post of my porch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "I think you need to read the neighborhood standards from a holding cell, Brenda," I replied calmly. Deputy Miller reached out and firmly grasped Brenda's arm. And in that exact fraction of a second, Brenda made her final, most catastrophic mistake of the morning. She didn't just resist arrest. She swung. With her free hand, Brenda slapped Deputy Miller square across the face. The sharp smack echoed loudly off the aluminum siding of my barn. The entire driveway froze. Even the tow truck driver, who had been trying to make himself as small as possible inside his cab, gasped out loud. You do not strike a police officer, ever. But you especially do not strike a deputy in front of the county sheriff. Miller didn't even flinch. He just looked at Brenda, his eyes narrowing into cold, unforgiving slits. Before Brenda could even open her mouth to excuse her behavior, the other 3 deputies moved in like lightning. In a matter of seconds, they had her spun around and firmly pressed against the hood of the sheriff's cruiser. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut around her wrists sounded like absolute poetry. "Brenda," Jim said, walking up to the cruiser and leaning in close, "you just went from a white-collar property crime to violently assaulting a sworn officer. That's a felony." Tears of sheer, unadulterated rage began streaming down Brenda's face, ruining her expensive makeup. "My lawyers will destroy you," she spat, writhing uselessly against the heavy steel cuffs. "The Whispering Oaks Legal Fund will bury this entire county in lawsuits. I own this neighborhood, and you do not know who you are messing with." Jim looked at me. I looked at Jim. Because Brenda's desperate threat was actually the most hilarious thing she had said all morning. She thought the HOA's massive legal fund was going to save her. She thought her multi-million-dollar subdivision would rally behind her to fight the evil, corrupt sheriff and the stubborn farmer. But Brenda didn't know the final secret. She didn't know who actually owned the land her precious Whispering Oaks subdivision was built on. And when I finally revealed the paperwork I had been keeping in my safe for 2 years, Brenda wasn't just going to lose her freedom. She was going to lose her entire neighborhood. There is a very specific, suffocating kind of silence that happens when a multi-million-dollar lie finally catches up to you. Brenda sat crammed in the back of the county sheriff's cruiser, her designer blazer crumpled, and her hands securely cuffed behind her back. She was still hyperventilating, furiously glaring at me through the reinforced glass of the squad car window. Even as she faced a felony assault charge, Her ego refused to die. She was still mouthing the words, "I own this neighborhood." She truly believed the Whispering Oaks Homeowners Association was an untouchable fortress that would shield her from consequence. But I was about to completely dismantle her fortress. Literally. I turned around, walked up the steps of my porch, and pulled a heavy, waterproof PVC tube out from beside the front door. Jim watched me quietly, an amused smirk playing on the corner of his mouth. He knew exactly what was inside that tube, because he had been sitting at my kitchen table the day I got it stamped by a judge. I walked back down the driveway, right up to the cruiser, and unfurled a massive, heavily inked county surveyor's map across the hood. "You keep talking about your neighborhood, Brenda," I said, loud enough for her to hear through the cracked window. "But you're missing one tiny, crucial detail. 2 years ago, when Whispering Oaks was first being developed, Brenda had desperately wanted to separate her luxury utopia from my working farm. As the newly crowned HOA president, she unilaterally approved the construction of a massive $300,000 stone and wrought iron perimeter fence, complete with a sprawling security gate. But Brenda was so arrogant and so completely obsessed with saving money for the HOA's landscaping budget that she refused to hire an independent surveyor. She just looked at the tree line, decided that was the border, and ordered the contract, told us to start digging. I had found the HOA president building a massive perimeter fence directly on my family's ranch. I could have stopped her on day one. I could have walked out there and told her she was trespassing. But my family had farmed this land for 3 generations. We don't appreciate being bullied by entitled neighbors. So, I let her build it. I sat on my porch and drank my coffee for 2 straight months, while she poured concrete, laid expensive stonework, and wired up security cameras. I let her finish every single inch of it. And the very day the cement finally dried, I brought out the official county surveyor to officially set the record straight, moving my property line marker exactly to where it legally belonged. The legal boundary of my farm didn't stop at the edge of my dirt driveway. It extended 30 feet past her brand new fence. The entire $300,000 perimeter, the guardhouse, and the only entrance road into Whispering Oaks were sitting squarely on Parcel A of my family's agricultural deed. "You didn't just try to steal my tractor today, Brenda," I said, tapping the heavy blue lines on the map. "You built your entire neighborhood's infrastructure on my private property. And in this state, any permanent structure built on a neighbor's land without an easement legally belongs to the landowner." The color rapidly drained from Brenda's face. The sheer, catastrophic weight of what I was saying finally broke through her delusions. "I own the fence," I stated, staring right into her terrified eyes. "I own the gate. And as of this morning, I am legally chaining it shut. Your neighborhood is officially landlocked." Jim chuckled softly, tapping the roof of the cruiser. "Have a nice trip to processing, Brenda." The deputy threw the car into drive, and Brenda was hauled away in a cloud of my farm's dust. Completely broken, the aftermath was absolute carnage. By noon, the HOA board received an emergency call from the county jail. When they realized their dictatorial president had just gotten herself arrested for assaulting a police officer, and in the process revealed that the HOA didn't actually own their only entrance. Total panic ensued. Without a legal right-of-way, no one could legally drive in or out of Whispering Oaks. The board begged for a meeting. The smug entitlement was entirely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. They were staring down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar crisis. I didn't let them off easy. To prevent me from bulldozing their beautiful stone entrance into gravel, The HOA was forced to pay me a massive seven-figure settlement just to purchase a permanent easement across my land. The payout completely emptied their reserve funds and slapped every single homeowner in Whispering Oaks with a devastating special assessment fee. Brenda, meanwhile, lost absolutely everything. She pled guilty to resisting arrest to avoid the heavier felony assault charge, landing her 6 months of probation and a permanent criminal record. But the criminal court was nothing compared to the civil courts. The Whispering Oaks HOA sued her personally for gross negligence, holding her entirely liable for the millions of dollars she cost them by building on my land. She was forced to sell her mansion at a massive loss just to cover her legal fees, fleeing the state in absolute disgrace. As for me, I used my massive settlement to buy 50 more acres, completely encircling the back half of their subdivision. My $120,000 Kubota tractor is still parked exactly where it always was, but now it sits behind a brand new $1 million stone fence that my terrible neighbors happily paid for, and they haven't sent me a single letter since.